My dear listener, there is a new wave of expressing your views and voices in downloadable format that you can share with your friends across the globe. What am I talking about? Have you heard about Anchor.fm? Now, Anchor is the simplest way and the easiest way of expressing or sharing your podcast. Now, remember, it has creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Amazing way. Anchor distributes your podcast for you from Spotify to Apple Podcast to Google Podcast to different other platforms for free. You don't need to pay. And interestingly, you can monetize your podcast with no minimum listenership. You don't need to have a particular number of listeners for you to monetize. Therefore, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You will not regret it. Welcome back to the third segment, and I'll start by posing a question. When you resigned or lost your job as a result of dismissal, did you receive a certificate of service? What is this certificate of service? I know that due to the bad relations that is accompanied by this, most of the time we don't always want to engage our bosses and or even the HRO, the human resource officers. However, understand that it is within the law to abide with it, and it requires the employer to issue a certificate of service to an employee upon termination of his or her employment, unless the employment has continued for a period of less than 4 consecutive weeks. So if it is less than 4 consecutive weeks, then this particular certificate of service is not necessary. But anything after 4 consecutive weeks, you need to go for the certificate of service, and it is mandatory. It is required by the law. This certificate of service contains the name of employer and his postal or her postal address, the name of employee, that is you, the date when employment of the employee commenced, the nature and usual place of employment of the employee, the date when the employment of the employee ceased or stopped, and such other particulars as may be prescribed. You found that maybe because of not having cordial rapport relationship with your employer, then the employer decides to come up with so many information that might interfere, that might harm your character. Then you are told that no employer is bound to give to an employee a testimonial, reference, or certificate relating to the character or performance of that employee, that you are not performing well, that what was happening, that anything that will talk about testimony, your testimonials, reference, or certificate relating to the character of a performance or performance of that employee is wrong. If willfully or by neglect the employer fails to give an employee a certificate of service, or who in certificate of service includes a statement which he knows to be false, commit an offense, and shall on conviction be liable to a fine not exceeding 100,000 shillings, equivalent almost to $1,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 6 months, or both. So remember, by listening that, remember that all this, you must always give a notice before resigning. If you are under contract and you just quit your job without notice, this is illegal under the Employment Act. You owe your employer for the notice period you would have served or period stipulated in your contract. If an employer launches a complaint in an industrial court, then you might find yourself paying damages that were uncalled for. We've had people paying their employers, and remember they're the ones that have resigned. So how do you determine your notice period? When is the best time to give notice? If you are paid weekly, yours is a 7-day notice period. And if you are paid at the end of the month, ensure that you give a notice of not less than 1 month. So if you are resigning in January, then you should have made your notice. You should have given your notice by the beginning of December. For probation, your notice period is 7 days to the date of your confirmation. So if, for example, your confirmation date, which mostly in some organization takes 3 months, if it was supposed to happen by January, by end of January, then 7 days before the end of January, you should have given your notice. Most people assume that you can just leave and your employer will understand. But I always advise that you serve your notice period, no matter how toxic your work environment is and bad. Another law you should know is that your employer can dismiss you without notice if you commit any act of gross misconduct. These are acts like violence, sexual harassment and misconduct, and excess use of alcohol or drugs at the workplace. Absenting yourself from work without taking leave or neglecting your duties can also be classified as gross misconduct. So, my dear listener, imagine if you are a boss and your employer comes to the office to sleep and gossip with colleagues. Why won't you fire them? That will definitely mean that you might not give the document that we are talking about, which is the certificate of service. But if you are the one resigning, make sure that you give notice based on the notice period that we have talked about. So as we now go to the next segment, the fourth segment, where we want to delve deep into what is gratuity. We want to know about all this, and then we see if we are doing the right thing.